Sugar and Spikes is a science-backed and semi-sarcastic mental health podcast for a new type of business leader. Mental health concerns are occasionally addressed, but this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any condition, mental, physical, metaphysical, or otherwise. That's a job for your doctor or therapist, not a podcast. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's get on with the show.
Welcome to a special episode of Sugar and Spikes. If you don't know, I'm Des. I am a serial content creator, host of this podcast, co-host of the podcast when Tammy is available. But Tammy's not here, our resident psychologist, because this is a bit of a special episode. We are doing a little bit of an interim season break. So last week we wrapped up season 2. We've done over 100 episodes and we've been going for over 2 years at this point. And generally when we do seasons, we just do it back to back. But I've wanted a bit of a break. Tammy's needed a bit of a break. So instead of taking kind of an empty break without letting you guys know and kind of disappearing, that didn't feel really good to me because this podcast is like my baby. Tammy came in maybe a quarter, after our first quarter, she came in and started helping out being the co-host. And we've grown from there. But really, at the core of Sugar and Spikes, it's been me talking to my computer, kind of riffing off of ideas and everything. And so for this interim break, we're going back to basics. It's going to be me sharing kind of some thoughts for the week, some ideas, just letting you guys know we're still here. We're just taking a break. So Sugar and Spikes, kind of as you've grown to know it, we'll be back. Season 3 is going to look a little different because we're continuously growing, and you'll hear more of that throughout this interim period. But we'll be back with full episodes in a month. So there's going to be 4 of these special interim episodes, and then we'll be back with full-blown episodes. So today, I kind of touched on it. We've been going for a while, and what I wanted to do was sit down and chat about the top 5 things that I've personally learned while doing this podcast. Like I said, I started this thing, Tammy's come in, we've grown it, it's become bigger than I think either of us kind of imagined it would be, and it's been a lot of fun. But looking back, I just wanted to cover kind of, the things that I've learned along the way. So if you're thinking about starting a podcast, if you're thinking about starting a blog, if you're thinking about, starting your own kind of content creation, or if you're already doing it and you need kind of a bit of a refresher, maybe a fresh spark, then maybe these 5 things can help give a new perspective on everything. They're things that I don't want to say I wish I would have known because, if someone had sat down and told me all these things, I'd been like, good story, bro, and still tried to manipulate everything because we always think we know better. So I'm kind of asking, maybe check the ego at the door for a minute. I know my ego comes up too. I got it. But give this a listen. Maybe there's a gem in here for you, for where you are in terms of creating all of that awesome content so you can get your name and face out there to be known for whatever wonderful work it is that you do. Okay, so number 1, by far the biggest lesson I've learned is just start. Learn along the way. And this really goes back to 2 years ago when I was sitting in front of my computer with a small little USB mic, just talking with the first things that would come to mind, talking kind of frantically. Like, if you go back and listen to those first episodes, which we've kept up, they're drastically different than what this episode is, than what, the season 2 finale was. There's a huge range of growth that has happened. And a part of that has come from just starting and not letting myself get in my own way. I had to deal with a lot of nerves at the start because there was, imposter syndrome. Who am I to do this? What am I really going to say? Turns out I had a lot to say. Like I said, we're starting 3 years. Um, but even beyond the, act of doing a podcast and figuring out, what are the episodes going to look like and things like that, I didn't know how to put a podcast up. It was only when I had my first episode and went to go put it onto iTunes that I had to learn the process that, oh, you need a host and you need to get it approved by iTunes, and you can also submit it to all these other feeds like Spotify and Google and Overcast and things like that. So with that, there were things that have come up that, like, I can't go back and fix, which is, on one hand, a little unfortunate because I was so excited of kicking off this podcast. They say best practice is to have 3 or 4, to give people kind of an opportunity to binge on things. I didn't do that. I started off with 1. I didn't have a launch strategy. Like I said, thinking back, I probably would if I were doing this all over again, but that's fine. It hasn't really hindered me in the long run. But now I know these things and I can incorporate those lessons into how we do other things like kicking off season 3. Is there a launch strategy behind it? Yeah. Now we have a bit of strategy. So learn along the way. You're going to make mistakes no matter how much you research. So it's worth it to just keep going. Start and keep going. Okay. The second lesson that I've learned that has been so valuable is don't be afraid to ask. And this really comes down into 3 key categories. Don't be afraid to ask for guests. Don't be afraid to ask for help. And don't be afraid to ask for feedback. Some of the best guests that I've had on and folks that have become, kind of ongoing guests or friends of the podcast and things like that were ones where I just reached out and I asked them. I didn't really know them. We kind of knew of each other, but I just shot an email and asked when we had, kind of the bigger names like Kara Alwaleba, Lorna Liz from Badass Business Babe, those ladies. It was an ask. Um, and I didn't have a connection to whether or not they would say yes or no. I just put it out there. They said yes. You never know when it's going to be a yes if you automatically make it a no by not asking. So that's the thing. If you're looking for a guest for your blog or podcast, ask. The worst that can happen is they say no and you're in the same situation that you're already in. Some other options are they'll say, I don't have time right now, but reach out next quarter, something like that. Then that's your job to follow up. It's a not no, but not right now. And the next piece is to ask for help. Like I said, this podcast is my pride and joy and something that I care about deeply. And over the course of the years, as life demands have shifted and the podcast has grown and, so many wheels have been turning and shifting, I've had to ask for help. I asked for help in terms of getting a podcast editor, in terms of getting someone to help with marketing, all of these things. Let's see, editor, marketing, someone to help with, episode coaching and things like that, because I want it to be better and I'm only one person. So if I get the perspective and skills from other people on their own personal zones of genius, then that's only going to lift the podcast to newer heights. Also, in terms of having a co-host, there have been times where I've, had to ping Tammy and just say, hey, I can't do this right now. I have too much going on. Can you take this so we make sure we post today or something like that, And that helps. So, yes, even if you're doing this like as a solo project, which is how it started, but then shifted. Like, even if you're doing it as a solo project, have some sort of team, and not necessarily like a team you're paying, but have a support system in place, because at the end of the day, you're building something bigger than yourself. So you're going to need support beyond yourself to make it go. And then the other thing is, don't be afraid to ask for feedback. I try to say it individually on each episode, and I hope it's a tone that carries all throughout the episodes. But if there are things that you guys want changed, that you want talked about, things that you don't like, let me know. I say it, leave it in a review, send me an email, send me a message, things like that. I'm open to feedback because, again, this kind of goes back to the it's bigger than myself. I can have an idea of what I want to say and where I want the podcast to go, but if I'm not serving your guys' needs, then this podcast really shouldn't exist. This exists to help the content creators, the side hustlers, and everyone that's trying to do 500 things in one day to know that they are not alone and that there are capabilities and skills to make it a little easier and to reduce the stress. If you're not getting that out of these episodes, then we need to know that so we can help and shift things. So, always open for feedback. And when you are open for feedback, then, as a content creator, it gives your audience buy in. You want that engagement. That's absolutely key because, a podcast is a way to build community. It's rarely ever talked about this in that way, but both blogs, podcasts, any sort of consistent content flow can build community because you have someone's undivided attention, and then there's a space where after the content is consumed where they need to respond, in some way or another. Maybe it's not necessarily responding to you, but a lot of times it is. But there's going to be a response. So it's this weird sort of like new conversation, a new form of communication that's happening. And the thing that I love with podcasts above blogs and things like that is it is dedicated time. When someone listens to a podcast, they're generally not multitasking on things that require a lot of brain power. So if someone's giving you that type of time, you owe it to your audience to be open to any sort of feedback they may have. Okay, the third lesson. Planning is key, but leave space for flexibility. So I feel like planning and flexibility has been the biggest roller coaster throughout the years of doing the podcast, of planning things out really hardcore, and then also when life gets really crazy, just taking it as it comes. And you need both. Um I haven't perfected the situation. I think in year 3 we may get a little closer to something that will consistently work for us. Um and you're seeing that right now in terms of looking at schedules and looking at what's going on in both of our lives, like myself and Tammy, and figuring out how do we get content with what's going on and planning for when things do get crazy and all of that stuff. Because while we're doing this interim stuff, there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes. So we're planning, but also when it comes to planning, that also gives you space to be flexible. A part of this is in regards to bulk content creation. I've said it once, I'll say it a million times. It is a lifesaver. Same thing with backups. Backup, backup, backup. That is one of my biggest mantras. Um, but when you bulk batch things and kind of have a vision for a month or a quarter, things like that, and then instead of doing a sort of just in time methodology of just week after week recording one new episode each week, when things hit the fan, you have you have your plan B. So by planning, you get the gift of flexibility, which when you are multitasking and doing a million different things, that is the biggest gift you can give yourself because no day looks like the day before. So being able to account for all of, the fire drills that come up and things like that, that's what's going to separate you from being able to continue on in a manner that, your audience knows will be, at the very least semi-consistent. versus just letting it all fall by the wayside. The next piece is have fun, because that's where the magic happens. At its core, Sugar and Spikes is fun. If we didn't have fun doing it, we wouldn't do it. I'm not going to be a famous podcaster. I may have dreams of it, but I don't think that that's actually going to happen. Fingers crossed. Um, but if you get too wrapped up in the tech, if you get too wrapped up in the, well, this is what I should do as a podcaster, this is what I should do as a blogger, these are the best practices. If that eats up all of your attention and you're not having fun with it, then don't do it. It's very, very difficult to monetize a podcast. It's very difficult to monetize a blog, especially to hit meaningful numbers. So, having that passion and having the fun behind you during those first couple of years when you're not seeing money of any sort, when you're not seeing that ROI, the fun is what's going to keep you going, because then it's something you kind of look forward to, hopefully, or something that you know connects to a bigger picture, and that's what's going to fuel you forward rather than just getting stuck in the, well, I have to do it like, you know, Joe Schmo says. That's just going to suck the fun out, and the second that things get a little crazy and things get out of hand, either with schedules or, something like that, then you're going to be looking for a way out. If you're having fun with it, you're going to want to find a door to continue it. Whereas if you're not having fun with it, you're going to look for an escape hatch. Does that make sense? Um, and the last thing is stop trying to fit in the box that wasn't made for you. I cannot tell you how many times I went to write the about the podcast section trying to fit in, well, this is what this podcaster's doing and this is what this other podcaster's doing, and well, if we want to attract that type of audience, then we need to do it like that. No. No, like, just no. Um, with season 3 coming up and the about Sugar and Spikes piece, we've kind of hit the most truest form of what the podcast is, and that came to me waking up one morning and just writing out words that were just kind of like flowing when I wasn't comparing myself. This year, all throughout this season 2, Tammy and I have kind of continued this string of what were our New Year's goals or resolutions, kind of. And one of my things was to really be careful of what messages I was taking in, because I wanted to make sure that whatever came out in Sugar and Spikes was my voice and not whatever the latest flavor of the week was. So I shut down and stopped following a lot of influencers that I really kind of connected with and really enjoy their content, but I wanted to make sure my voice had a chance to appear. So, sometimes it takes finding inspiration and it takes finding motivation from things outside of your zone of genius. Um, because, I mean, our brains need space. That's one reason why we're setting up the ability to take, 7 days off without having to think about it and letting the podcast kind of run itself, is because this baby needs room to breathe. And that's only going to happen by, setting it up and not consuming, like Gary Vee books or personal or professional development books and podcasts throughout the week. Like, that's why vacations are so important. And maybe you can't take a vacation, like, especially if we're talking just blogging or podcasting, things like that. If we're talking things that aren't your main source of income, those things you still need a vacation from them. Um, because that's when you can kind of come back refreshed with a different perspective. And I think we kind of get caught up in the, well, I always need to be working towards being better and stuff, but some of the biggest inspirations and ideas that I've had have come from reading, like, books about vodka or fashion books, things that don't directly connect to what this podcast is about. So, if you feel like there are too many voices kind of coming at you and there are too many different stories kind of coming at you, if that means unsubscribing from this podcast because you need to find your own voice, do it so you can be the voice that needs to be heard in your realm, in your zone of genius, in your professional area. Um so yeah, those are kind of my 5 lessons I've learned in terms of shutting out the noise. It's been like a complete godsend. All of these things have been lessons that have become just so clear as I look back on the last 2 seasons and as I start to plan for season 3, and I couldn't be more excited about it. We have some fun announcements coming up. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get podcasts, on Spotify or whatever. If you like what we're doing, if you like what Sugar and Spice is about, please leave us a review on iTunes. That would mean the world. And please share this. If you maybe this isn't your cup of tea, but it's your friend's cup of tea or something like that, please give us a share. Um that's how this thing is going to grow. And we really appreciate it. I'll be back next week with another special solo Sugar and Spikes. And I'll talk to all y'all then. All right. Bye.